This is the Barbados Today afternoon news for Monday, April 9th. Thank you for joining us. I am Mary Claire Williams. We begin with news this afternoon that the 2018 sugar harvest has begun. It started this morning following recent calls from private sugarcane farmers for government to address their concerns over the late harvest. Last week, Finance Minister Chris Sinclair said farmers would be paid outstanding monies before this year's harvest began, but he said government would now have to find money to pay farmers for this year's crop. In other news this afternoon, President of the Barbados Union of Teachers, Pedro Shepherd, is calling on government to rethink the process of allocating students to secondary schools. Shepherd told the BUT's 44th Annual General Conference this morning that the current system could be one of the factors contributing to violence in schools.
That the system of allocating students to our secondary schools is a problem, and that the Ministry of Education needs to look at reviewing the current allocation system for the Barbados secondary schools entrance examination, which would allow for some of the slower students to be allocated to the so-called better schools. I am sure that it was already suggested that 30% or so of the allocation to those schools be taken from among the underachievers. The curriculum being used at the newer secondary schools must also be adjusted to reflect the intake from the Barbados secondary schools entrance examination. And we posit that the current system is flawed, as it was relying too heavily on certification.
Meanwhile, in her address, Labour Minister Dr. Esther Bayer-Suku says she supports calls for zero tolerance to violence in schools. Teachers across the island have been calling for urgent action to address that concern following several incidents of violence in the island's learning institutions.
For all of us, we have a vested interest in our schools being safe. And so I will certainly support your calls in ensuring that we have that dialogue with the ministry so that our schools are safe, that teachers and staff are safe, that the students are safe, and that the parents can be assured that their children are safe. Now, we may be trying to turn back the hands of time, but we can't just sit back and do nothing. I think it was your president said, better late than never. I think we have to continue trying and keep no stone unturned as we address that problem.
Health officials are meeting from today to discuss changes to the National Drug Formulary. The talks come on the heels of concerns from several sections since the start of the new formulary on April 1st. Health Minister John Boyce says he hopes those concerns can be sorted out during the meeting.
There are few drugs, especially what they refer to as combination drugs, which have raised some eyebrows in terms of prescriptions issued by doctors or prescriptions being filled by pharmacists. So I want to assure Barbadians that the issues raised and the questions raised in this regard will be dealt with over the next couple of days in discussion with the representatives and, of course, the drug service. And we want to make sure that the best solution exists for Barbados and that we continue to enjoy the kind of health care and the kind of health treatment that we are accustomed to.
Sports now, Jamaican Johan Blake came in third, while South Africa's Nkani Simbeni took gold in the men's 100 meters finals at the Commonwealth Games earlier today. Blake was the pre-race favorite, but he stumbled at the start and never recovered. He ran the race in 10.19 seconds, while Simbene stopped the clock in 10.03. Meanwhile, Trinidadian Michelle Lee Ayi captured gold in the women's 100 meters. She ran in 11.14 seconds in today's final. Jamaican Christania Williams took silver in 11.21 seconds, while her compatriot Gayon Evans took bronze in 11.22 seconds.
There's regional and international news after this short break.
Barbados Today, news you can trust.
Thank you for staying with us. We're back now with news from the region. Haiti's former police commissioner, Guy Philippe, has launched a challenge against his drug conviction. Philippe was found guilty in a U.S. court last year of charges of accepting bribes to protect cocaine smugglers who used Haiti as a transshipment point to the U.S. His plea allowed him to avoid trial for a more serious trafficking charge that could have resulted in him being jailed for life. He reportedly filed an appeal against the 9-year jail term handed down last June for money laundering and drug trafficking. Philippe has submitted a motion to vacate his conviction to the South Florida Federal Court. In a letter to the Senate, he said his conviction remains unjustified by the American government. And finally, on the international scene, Syria and its main ally Russia are blaming Israel for carrying out an attack on a Syrian airbase near Homs on Monday. It followed reports of a poison gas attack by forces of President Bashar al-Assad in a rebel-held town. We get the details in this Reuters report.
Syrian soldiers seen here. A spokesperson for Israel has declined to comment. While Tel Aviv hasn't taken sides in the Syrian war, it has conducted scores of airstrikes within the country in recent years, mostly unacknowledged. Reuters' Dan Williams says there appears to be two main reasons for that. One, to avoid publicly humiliating its enemies, sparking retaliation.
And the other appears to be respect for Russia, which is the big power that really calls the shots in Syria. Russia has been helping Assad as well. It wants to stabilize the country, and it's very unhappy about anything that could be deemed to have destabilized Syria. There seems to be a discrete arrangement, an agreement between Russia and Israel, that Israel can act within Syria as long as it does not destabilize the central government there. It would appear that this arrangement also requires Israel not to be overly public about the Russian blind eye to its actions within Syria.
Moscow says Israel fired 8 missiles at the base from Lebanese airspace, and 5 were intercepted by Syrian defences. 14 people are believed to have been killed in the strike, which Syria's state-run media originally blamed on the United States. Washington has denied it, as has NATO ally France. The airstrike happened hours after President Trump had warned of, quote, a big price to pay for the Syrian government after reports of another alleged chemical attack by the country's military surfaced over the weekend.
That's news this afternoon. Remember, you can get more on our website, www.barbadostoday.bb. You can also subscribe to our e-paper, email updates, and like us on Facebook. We're on Izumi Media in bus terminals and on Screenplay at supermarkets and gas stations near you. You can also find us on Mix 96.9 FM. I am Mary Claire Williams. Good afternoon.